I have a suspicion, and I said this to the vestry, I don't know if I said this to the class last time, but the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator has 4 areas, and they all combine. One is extrovert, introvert, one is intuitive, sensate, take in through your intuition versus your senses. One is thinking, feeling, how you process, and then judging or perceiving, whether you tend to focus on things open-ended or like things wrapped up. And we just did the Myers-Briggs as a vestry, as a leadership team. We found some interesting things. One is that almost all the vestry are J's, meaning really like to have things wrapped up. And no wonder our vestry meetings now have gone from 2.5 hours to 90 minutes. A lot of more thinkers rather than feelers. And as we reflected on that, I thought about the fact of where we are in our particular life. God raises up certain personalities for certain periods. And this is a period where we probably need more of a focused on planning, on correcting. We've got a huge building issue, so it's very interesting in that. But we have a balance of introverts and extroverts, and I think that's very healthy for us as a leadership team. But we have to watch in our meetings that the extroverts who get so excited about ideas and thoughts and like I do, is I like to think out loud, have to be very sensitive about looking for those who stay quiet and introverted. Now, Jesus, interestingly enough, we can get a very solid impression of Jesus from the Gospels. And as I said, Jesus was a balance of extroversion and introversion, but he was not someone who, from everything we can tell, was not someone who was a grandstander. The way he taught was, rather than being the loudest voice in the room, was he posed questions and he told stories. And that's a wonderfully balanced way of teaching, because when you ask questions and tell stories, it allows the hearers to hear the message. And not to defer to the strongest personality, but to move inside and allow that message, allow God to speak to them within their own hearts and within their own psyches. So he goes up to Peter and he says, "But who do you say I am?" Or he tells the story, and it's evocative. So it's very important when she was talking about, I think, the most dominant voice, and how people will almost automatically move with the strongest voice that may not be the wisest voice. That to be able to tell a story or to ask a question really does evoke that deep inner wisdom. And I think that's a reason why Jesus said to Mary, who was sitting at his feet, "You've chosen the better part," the listening, the reflecting part of that as well. Not diminishing Martha, but the key word in that story is Martha was distracted with much serving, whereas Mary was focused and listening. Other thoughts about how many of you identify yourselves as introverts? How many of you identify yourselves as extroverts? Less. I think this parish is probably, if we could take a corporate personality type, I think this parish is more introverted than extroverted, and I think it makes sense. Think about the space. It's big, it's dark, you can hide. I was rector for a number of years, St. Old Donation, Virginia Beach. Smaller, bright, clear windows. You can't hide in that church. And it was the most extroverted church I have ever seen in my life. It even exhausted Kathy Lewis, and she's pretty extroverted. People were going and moving and doing and this and that and out there, and we want to party and we want to do this and we want to do that. I mean, you called a group together, you'd have 80, 90 people. Because they were extra, it was an extroverted personality for that parish. But Christ in St. Luke's is a place of mystery, of quiet. The other night when we, after the Shrove Tuesday, we went into Shrove Tuesday party, we went into the church, and it was candlelit, and it was dark, and people didn't want to leave. It was absolutely beautiful. You could go into the shadows, and you could just observe, and it was so gorgeous. So there is a quality of introversion in this parish. I remember one of the first vestry meetings I came to here, and I threw out a question, and no one responded. Made me very nervous. No one. They just looked at me. And finally I had to say something. What else? When you think about being an introvert, or you think about introversion, how does that affect your faith, your spirituality, and what you need? Yes?
Well, I was wondering, when listening to her, if she had any kids. She does. And and just think about the difference between an introverted mother or an introverted female is more of a problem, I think, than an introverted male or an introverted father. I think the demands of motherhood kind of force you to come out and interact more.
Yeah.
Not just for your children, but in order to be part of the mothering world. Whereas a man who's introverted, that's more acceptable.
Where are you're introverted?
Oh, I don't know what I am.
Okay. Well, you can certainly sustain a lot because you're a writer.
Depends on the situation.
Yeah, but you're also forced to engage as a mother. Where do you see your family on that, the rest of your family? Are you like the others in that respect, or do you find yourself different?
I think sometimes in a family of introverts, like one person has to be the conduit. Like you have to have at least one person who's willing to reach out and set up situations. Otherwise, it becomes so insular that,
Yeah.
it's not healthy in a family for
Yeah.
everyone to
Yeah.
be so isolated.
Yeah. I know.
Somebody has to reach out.
Yeah, I know in our family, our daughter is definitely an introvert. I'm more toward the center. I can go either way. I've tested both introvert and extrovert. Kathy is off the charts extrovert. And so I think sometimes she feels some real pressure to maintain that as the one who engages the rest of the family in that. And the other night, Anna came home, and the other night we were watching a little TV Friday night, and Anna finally turned to Kathy and said, "Mom, will you just be quiet?" Because it was too much. Sue?
I was thinking about faith, and growing up, I had a nicely extroverted mother, Navy wife, and
Yeah.
type family, and I loved to go to my friend's house where they all trooped down to the library and got books, and
Yeah.
it was quiet, and they would read, everybody would read, and but I think it probably influences how you want to pray. What attracts you to the type of prayer? He said, how does introversion or extroversion affect our faith? And I would think that you would be more attracted. I don't know, but I was wondering if extrovert would be like more attracted to cataphatic and like Ignatian kind of prayer and more active prayer, and an introverted person might be more attracted to centering prayer. I was just wondering.
I think that's right. there are two kinds of prayer. One is called cataphatic. Phatic is phasis, or image. Cataphatic means using imagery. And icons, the use of icons can be a cataphatic form, or prayer can be very active in terms of cataphatic. When we walk into our church, it's a very cataphatic experience because there's so many images, there's so many things to see. Apophatic means apart from imagery, and that is more of the kind of prayer that Sue is talking about, the centering prayer, where you sit quietly and you just allow the images to dissipate. You might have a word, a holy word that you use when images come, to just let them go and to go into a very deep place. It's interesting, though, if I go back to Father Basil Pennington, who wrote probably the single most important book initially on centering prayer. He was just a radical extrovert. And he drove the whole community of monks there, the Trappists, most of them in Spencer, Massachusetts, were radical introverts, and it drove Basil crazy, and he drove them crazy. A good example of that was also Thomas Merton was an extrovert. He was not an introvert, and so he went off. He knew he had to balance his life, so he went off to a hermitage. He lived in a house apart from the community most of the time. He still worshipped with the community, but very soon his extroversion got expressed in his writing and his correspondence with people. And he had a huge impact in the 60s on the Berrigans, on Joan Baez and others. But he started off really fleeing from that to a kind of introversion because his life was so empty, lost in the extroverted side as it was. Other thoughts or comments? Yeah.
Well, I can speak maybe a little to both of the comments.
You can speak to both.
I consider myself an extreme introvert.
Yeah.
But as a military spouse and continuing to move around the world and country for my family's survival, I've had to put myself out there, which has been incredibly uncomfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't keep picking up and moving and hope that your kids are going to get connected and everybody be in the right place without making the outside connections. The flip side of that is that I get up between 4:30 and 5 every single morning for my quiet time.
Yeah.
I can't survive without it. And this morning, I sat there and watched the sun, the light come up. I couldn't see the sun. It was beautiful, and it was just very centering for me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's my introverted time too, is the early morning. My day is fragmented if I don't have that. And look at Jesus. Long before dawn, he went to a lonely place. And if you go to the first chapter of Mark, which I think brings it up most succinctly, he's been healing all day. There have been crowds of people, and it says long before dawn, he gets up and he goes to the place, and he's in prayer to the lonely place, or to deserted place, the Greek might say. And there he has that quiet time. But soon the disciples find him because the crowds are gathering, and he's there, and he's got to respond. And anyone remember what he says? What he does?
Yeah.
What does he do, Sue?
He goes on, he doesn't respond to him.
He doesn't respond to him, which could look to a good extroverted spirituality, that would be so offensive. I mean, the people are waiting for you. Get out there and heal them. Do it. But Jesus is listening to a different voice, and it's the voice that comes from the lonely place. My heart teaches me night after night. And so he says, no, we're going to go on because that's why I came. I didn't come just as a healer. I came as the one to bring the kingdom of God, to give a vision of the world ruled by God and God's compassion. And so he went on. He was listening to a different voice. And that's the other piece that she picks up on, I think, that's very powerful for me, and we'll end with this, is that she talks about how we are hardwired, and I've forgotten the way she put it, maybe some of you can remember better, but we're hardwired to mirror back the personality of the group, of the collective. We just learn that instinctively. And therefore, it's important to step out of the pressure of the collective personality, the collective values, to step out of that to listen to a different voice, the voice of God. And that's precisely what Jesus did after this tremendous experience where he went out into the wilderness and he heard a bunch of voices. And it's interesting because Satan in the wilderness, the word Satan, which sometimes has an article in front of it, means the one who opposes or the one who takes a different stance. And it's very clear in the Gospels that the stance Satan takes is the stance of the collective values of the Roman Empire. And Jesus has to go out there and he's got to contend with the pressure of those two voices. The voice of Satan, who carries the collective values of popularity, of power, of domination, versus the voice of his Father, who has a very different perspective, the voice of the Spirit. And so Jesus finally, what voice wins? The voice of his Father. And then he says he returns in the power of the Spirit. And what does he do? He doesn't talk about power, control, success. He talks about healing, liberating, coming to the oppressed, not to the kings and emperors. And so that we have to find our way as we journey into the quiet. It's a way of journeying into that place where we can listen to the voice of God that may speak of a different message than the cultural collective values that assault us from every side, both consciously and unconsciously. And you think about media, and I'm not against media, I love media, but media is organized to work both on your conscious and your unconscious. And so we have to find those moments to step away from it so that our heart can teach us night after night. Okay? Michael, you had a question real fast.
If you look at, like, evolutionarily speaking, you've got, I mean, you can see both the role of introversion and extroversion.
Yes.
I mean, like, if you see the whole mirroring thing, that was very important when we were just developing as hominids. I mean, because you had that, you needed to be part of the group in order to survive, because you could not go out on your own and survive. And yet,
well
at
said.
the same time, you've got the innovations like, say, fire or the wheel that surely could not have been made if someone didn't have any alone time.
Brilliant what you said. Everyone hear what he said. I thought that's a brilliant statement about the fact that it was our survival to move with that. And still is in many respects. Very few people are called away from the collective, but we are talking about that unique voice of God, because as Christians, we are called to be transformers of culture and not simply consumers of culture.